Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie, and today I'm so excited to be showing you Mooncat's last collection of the year, which happens to be a collaboration with Avatar: The Last Airbender. Like other Mooncat collabs, these are going to be limited edition, and unfortunately these are also only going to be sold in the US and Canada. I do have a lot of thoughts to share, so I will save those for after comparisons. For now, let me just show you the swatches. So for the first four shades, I am going to be showing the unicartons they come in because they are just so beautifully designed. So here's a look at each side, and this first polish is called Bloodbender, which is described as a blue magnetic lacquer that reveals a deep burgundy base when magnetized. This had a really lush, highly pigmented formula. It is a little bit on the jelly side, but because it is so highly pigmented and more of a darker color, I found that it was pretty opaque for me in just two coats alone. But since it is a jelly, depending on your application or if you prefer doing thinner coats, you might want to do a third for this because you might see some visible nail line, especially if your nails are a bit longer. So again, here is two coats in the cat eye effect, and here it is in the velvet effect, which looks so stunning, super lush. I love how the magnetic pigment looks. It's just so glowy and stands out so beautifully against this base color. It also has a subtle shift to this purple indigo kind of color in more extreme lighting as well. So it's a little bit of a duochrome in that way. And here is two coats of Bloodbender in direct sunlight, and I will be showing it in lower lighting in a second. But I have the velvet effect on my middle two fingers and the cat eye on my pointer and pinky. I feel like it is looking really dark here on camera where the base almost looks black, but it does have that really deep burgundy shade. Here's a close-up of the next box. This is for the shade called Breath of Wind, which is the first thermal in the collection. This transitions from a smoky gray when cold, as seen here in the bottle, to white when warm, and it's filled with a blue shimmer. The formula on this was nice. I would say it has a little bit of a crelly leaning formula, so it's not as sheer and jelly as the last shade, for example. The first coat is a little bit sheer because it's kind of a light shade, but it does build up really nicely in two coats where I had a hard time making out my visible nail line. So in the cold state, I feel like this is a solid two coater. So if your nails are shorter than mine, two coats is probably all you need. But once you see it in the warm state, I feel like here in the live swatch portion, you can see some kind of dark spots here and there. So this could have used a third coat maybe, at least just to even it out, because again, even with the white shade, I feel like I can't make out my visible nail line that much. And I also found that to be true in my full hand portion in the direct sunlight. So, you know, it's a 2 to 3 coater depending on your application. The blue shimmer in this was a nice little touch, but it is on the subtle side, not super glowy. Here is the next box for the earth element polishes. Of course, it is all green, and this polish is called Tales of Ba Sing Se, which is a multi-chrome magnetic lacquer that shifts between yellow and orange and reveals a green base when magnetized. This pretty much had the same formula as Bloodbender, being a very highly pigmented kind of jelly-leaning polish. So it's a little squishy looking on the first coat, and it wasn't 100% even coverage either, but because of how dark the base color ends up being, it was pretty much fully even and opaque in just two coats for me. Again, this magnetized super easily. It was just very smooth, but as usual, I do prefer this in the velvet effect because it just looks so incredibly plush and glowy. There's a lot of dimension between the shimmer color and the base, but I was confused about the description because it says that the shimmer goes from yellow and orange, but I only see yellow and green, which you can see here at more extreme angles. And here is my full hand swatch, again in two coats with the velvet effect on my middle two fingers and the cat eye on my pointer and pinky. I did have a little hair caught on my middle finger, so I'm sorry it looks a little dinged up, but yeah, this is a very strong yellowy green kind of shade, which I'm not sure if I love. It's usually not my favorite kind of shades of green. And the last box design we have is of course for the fire element. So it is red with kind of a black gradient on the bottom, and the shade is called Jasmin Dragon, which is a burnt orange jelly base filled with a brighter orange magnetic pigment that's also filled with these iridescent yellow to orange to green flakies and red glitter. So as expected, this had a similar formula to the other two magnetics so far, being slightly more on the jelly leaning side, as I'm sure you can tell here from the first coat. It was really easy to work with, very highly pigmented, so I found it built up nice enough for me on 2 coats where I had a hard time making out my visible nail line, so I can't imagine most people, especially with shorter nails, would need more than 2, but of course that also just comes down to personal preference. So yeah, once magnetized in the cat eye effect, you get more of that contrast between the darker burnt orange base and especially all of the flakies in the back. I think they're a little harder to see with the velvet effect since it just brings up all the shimmer to kind of cover them. It really only stands out when you're moving your nails around. But yeah, lots of dimension in this one too, and I thought it was really interesting to see a burnt orange because I was just expecting it to be a red, so I'm kind of glad that it was orange. I also loved how the flakies glowed in lower lighting. Up next we have Spirit Water, which is another thermal. This one transitions from a slate gray when cold, as seen here in the bottle, to a lighter aqua when warm, and it's also filled with these color shifting iridescent aqua to green flakies. This had a really fantastic formula that was just really smooth and easy to apply, very highly pigmented as well, and really even coverage. It is a bit sheer on the first coat because of that jelly leaning base, but it built up to almost full opacity in 2 coats, even with this lighter warm state color. And yeah, the flakies in this were just so stunning. I loved the contrast where they stood out obviously the most against the gray cold state, but they looked really nice in the warm state as well. The only other thing I do want to mention is that I noticed this polish had a little bit of a funky smell to it, which I know can happen with some blue polishes. In my experience though, they've always been with darker shades, so I was really surprised to experience it in this one. Next up we have my Cabbages, which is a green flaky lacquer jam-packed with iridescent flakies that shift from green to yellow to orange. So this is in a very sheer, lightly tinted green jelly base. You can see a subtle wash of that color on the first coat, but it's again obviously super packed with all of those flakies, so it builds up to be almost full coverage in just 2 coats alone. If you look close enough, you might be able to see some bald spots, but I think there's just so many flakies in this that you really don't need a 3rd coat. If anything, it's just easier to dab on some flakies in certain spots because it self-levels really nicely. So again, for my full hand swatch, I'm showing 2 coats with top coat, and I could barely make out some visible nail line. It's an incredibly full coverage formula that was really easy to work with, not finicky at all. The flakies all laid down super flat as well, so I don't think you would need a glitter grabber or 2 coats of top coat, but I highly would recommend a peel off base. I feel like I noticed the flakies would also have a subtle shift to blue in very extreme lighting. The last thermal in the collection is called Banished Prince, which is a dark red when cold to bright red when warm thermal that is filled with these large iridescent orange to yellow to green shifting flakies. Not to sound like a broken record, but this had another fantastic formula. It was just so smooth to apply despite how many and how large those flakies are. I was really impressed with the coverage being so even and highly pigmented, where I wouldn't call it a 1 coater. I still would recommend doing 2 coats, but it just looked really nice on 1 coat, almost very creamy in a way. So I feel like this is a solid 2 coater. I can't imagine most people needing 3 for this one. And despite me calling the base creamy, I feel like it was still sheer enough to allow all of those iridescent flakies to just really glow. It just had such a beautiful contrast. I know we're all thinking the same thing, so don't worry, I will be showing it in comparisons later, but yeah, to confirm, this isn't a black to red thermal, it's just a very dark red, but I think in lower lighting it can be dark enough that it looks black. And rounding out the collection, we have the Avatar State, which is a sheer white base filled with a blue shimmer that glows a bright aqua in the dark. So I know in the bottle it almost had this yellow kind of coloring to it. That's mainly because of the blue iridescent shimmer. If you don't know, usually the blue against the white can kind of make it look yellow, but I feel like that's really only noticeable in the bottle. Seeing it on the nail, it looked like a very true, stark white. The formula is pretty much what you would expect for a sheer milky white kind of polish, though I didn't find that this one was as self-leveling as the rest of the shades in the collection. So on 2 coats, it did seem a little bit more patchy in some spots. So I found I needed a third to really even everything out, which I think adds to the glow in the dark effect. It looked so strong, but for my full hand swatch, I did just 2 coats, and I actually thought it looked a lot more even here, so maybe with my thumbnail being much larger, you know, that's why it needed a third coat. You could also do a third coat if you want a bit more coverage and to obscure your nail line a bit more, but it's not going to be fully opaque like any of the other shades. So here is 2 coats in the dark after just the few seconds I showed it in direct sunlight, and it is super strong, a very nice smooth and even glow. And here are my full hand swatches of the Avatar The Last Airbender collection. Again, I'm wearing 2 coats of everything with the magnetics in the velvet effect on my middle 2 fingers and the cat eye on the other 2. Moving on to comparisons, we're starting with Bloodbender, and I first pulled out Epilogue to Utopia since it's another magnetic that has a similar kind of coloring, and seeing it in the bottle, I thought Bloodbender might also be similar to a Most Destructive Melody, which is not a magnetic, it's just a multi-chrome kind of shade, but that one has a little bit more of a stronger blue-purple color head on, with a much more intense color shift to pink in extreme lighting, which honestly was kind of similar to Epilogue to Utopia. Bloodbender is the only one that doesn't really look as pink. So here they are unmagnetized, and then with the cat eye effect to show the difference in the bases. I knew I also had to show this next to Cirque's Paradox, which is basically the closest to a dupe. It has a very similar burgundy base color with a blue to slightly purple leaning multi-chrome magnetic, but it is a lot more color shifty in Cirque, so more of a true multi-chrome, if that makes sense, while Bloodbender is more of like a duochrome in my opinion. So I'm showing 2 coats of each here, just unmagnetized, so you can see the differences in their shimmer, particle, and density. The other main difference is that Cirque is a bit more sheer. For the cat eye effect, I had to do a third coat to match the look of Mooncat in 2. I did also want to show Bloodbender next to a couple of other polishes I've shared recently, including Kathleen & Co.'s Harvester of Sorrow, which is just a true multi-chrome shade, not magnetic, but kind of a similar indigo color in a purple base. And here is KBShimmer's Azure Wish, which is a magnetic, but that has a black base with a much brighter cyan aqua blue shimmer that shifts to a darker blue, but not so much purple in extreme lighting. So these are definitely very different and not dupes. Next for Breath of Wind, here it is next to Castle of Cobwebs, which is another gray base with a blue shimmer. If anything, I would say Castle of Cobwebs is a little bit closer in color to the warm state of Breath of Wind, or maybe just an in-between of these two. And I would say that the base is a little bit more jelly or sheer, and the shimmer is a little bit more sparse. I saw some people curious to see how Breath of Wind would compare to Flying Nimbus, which is another thermal. That one does transition from white to blue, but the white base is just a lot more opaque in Flying Nimbus, so I wouldn't say these are close at all. Then for Tales of Ba Sing Se, here it is next to Mutiny, which is Mooncat's most recent green magnetic. The shimmer in Mutiny is a little bit more of a true brighter green, and the base is also a much darker kind of teal color. So it overall is a very blue leaning green, while Tales of Ba Sing Se is more of a yellowy green. So that made me think of ILNP's Frankie, but on the nail they don't compare at all. Next for Jasmin Dragon, this one immediately reminded me of Holo Taco's Feeling Sparks from their camping collection, but that one is more of a true red kind of base with a much brighter yellowy golden kind of shimmer. I feel like they're looking a little too close on camera, but in real life, Jasmin Dragon really does have that burnt orange kind of color, so it's not as red as Holo Taco. And I'd say that the flakies in Mooncat are a bit larger and more sparse as well. Then for Spirit Water, this one immediately reminded me of Mooncat's Triceratops, which is just a gray base filled with these iridescent flakies that have some pops of green but are mainly blue. So I figured I could try to use that as a recreation attempt with a couple of blue flakies, including Acidwashed on the left and Wish I Hadn't Cried So Much on the right. Between these two, Acidwashed is definitely the closest in color to Spirit Water, and going back to Triceratops, it is very similar, but I would say that it's a little more cool tone than Spirit Water. I don't have another polish similar to my Cabbages, so I wanted to show it quickly next to Mooncat's Serpents of Eden, which is a shimmer, obviously not a flaky by any means, but I just thought they had a very similar coloring to them with the strong yellowy green that you see head on, but then in extreme lighting, you get a little bit of this blue pop of color. Obviously, it's more stronger in Serpents because it's more of a densely packed shimmer, but you do see some of that blue in my Cabbages. The only other green jelly flaky bomb that I have is Mooncat's Hardcore Buttercup, which hopefully you can tell is a totally different shade of green. I would say much more blue toned in Buttercup. It also isn't as packed with the flakies, where my Cabbages just has, again, that very full coverage look, but it's just more sparse in Buttercup. Then for Banished Prince, we of course are looking at it next to Holo Taco's Dead Serious from their Halloween collection. Good news, bad news situation. The good news is that Banished Prince is basically a dupe for it. It maybe has a slightly brighter red base, but it also has larger flakies, and of course the bad news is that this is also limited edition. And lastly, for the Avatar state, here it is next to Mooncat's Green-Eyed Monster, which basically has the same exact kind of formula when it comes to a milky, sheer, white Crelly with a shimmer and it's glow in the dark. The main difference between them is that Green-Eyed Monster has a green shimmer with a green glow, while the Avatar state is a blue shimmer with a blue glow. So here they are in 2 coats each. I had them charging for the same amount of time, but Green-Eyed Monster is a bit brighter. And for anyone who's curious, here is the Avatar state next to Holo Taco's Swan Song, which is their milky white Crelly that came out last year. It does have a blue shimmer, but it's a little bit darker in color, but the bigger difference, I think, is the shimmer size, where it's more finely milled in Holo Taco, so definitely not dupes. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons of Mooncat's Avatar: The Last Airbender collection. As always, I would love to know your thoughts on this release and collab, because I thought it was really well done. I've actually never seen Avatar before, and I know that sounds crazy because I always hear amazing things about it. It's always so highly recommended, like people would just assume that I would love the show, so maybe I will get to it. But as somebody who isn't familiar with the show, I feel like the polishes were just really well thought out. Like, they seem to fit the elements really well. Obviously, from an objective standpoint, looking at the polishes in terms of like their formulas, applications, they were really high quality. The magnetics were gorgeous. The thermals transitioned easily. Although, you know, my main gripe with thermals is just that they have a shorter shelf life. So I always want to give that like warning, if you do like them, that they can last like a couple of years as long as you are storing them away from sunlight and not having like extreme temperature changes. But yeah, especially for the high price point that these are at, please make sure that you love both states of the thermal colors, just in case, you know, it does die, you won't be disappointed with what you end up with. But yeah, all the polishes were just so beautiful. They applied amazing, just really high quality that I think is more reflective, or just like what you would expect for Mooncat's luxury price point. And as far as like the collab goes, The boxes were really beautifully designed, which I feel like is, again, something that we've come to expect with their previous collabs. I also love the detailing with the bottles, where they always have like the custom design on like the front face, and the extra added detail for this collab being the gold caps. I feel like that just makes them even more luxurious. It's a nice way for them to stand out in your Mooncat collection as well, and a lot easier to tell them apart as collab shades, because the front faces can be like a little hard to see sometimes. The only thing I was a little disappointed by, honestly, was the fact that they don't come in a collection box, because I feel like that's just what we have come to expect from Mooncat collabs. I know it's such a trivial thing, because for a lot of people, the collection boxes are just extra clutter or just very wasteful, because a lot of people just throw them out. So don't get me wrong, I do understand the argument there, where moving away from these bigger, more special boxes is just, you know, better for the environment and whatnot. But there is just something about not seeing it for this collab that just kind of made me a little, not upset, but I don't know, there's something about it, because obviously Mooncat earlier this year raised their prices by $2 on every single finish. So again, they're like really in that luxury price point. And since they never do collection boxes, I feel like having a specific box for a collab just made them really special, you know? So having this price increase, but now sort of scaling back in terms of like their collabs, I don't know, there's something about it that I just don't love. But again, I know that's like such a non-issue for a lot of people. Like, it really is better to not have boxes, I guess. If anything, it would be more concerning if we just saw like a decrease in quality after the price increase, but I feel like that hasn't been the case at all. Like, you know, these do perform really, really well. Obviously, it's very subjective if, you know, they're worth it. So I'm curious to know what you all think of these, especially if you are fans of the show, because I feel like fans can be a bit more picky with collaborations. At least from what I've seen on Reddit, it seems like a lot of fans are happy with how this collab turned out, and like they did it justice. So make sure you let me know your thoughts down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!